Hi, this is Ren,
This is Casey.
and this is All Walks of Film.
We just got back from seeing Park Chan-wook's new film, Handmaiden.
Now, I'm actually a huge Park Chan-wook fan. I've liked him ever since I saw Old Boy, which was kind of my introduction to the Korean New Wave. I then watched the Vengeance trilogy, JSA, and Thirst. I also saw I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The only film I haven't seen is Stoker.
Yeah.
So,
Parentheses yet.
right. So,
Oh, and cut.
yes.
Yeah, from the three extremes.
Right. Park Chan-wook is a really interesting filmmaker. One of the things that I've liked about him in the past is how every character is humanized. No matter what side of the coin they're on. Watching his films, you don't really get a sense of good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
However, my experience with this film changed that perspective. There is now one film where it did seem that there were one-dimensional characters. So I guess we can get into that.
Yeah, I guess, before getting into spoilers, I recommend the movie, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting movie. As a Chanwook Park film, I'm a little disappointed, but as a film that's coming out this year, it's definitely up there as one of the better films.
Okay, so you think that this film was less humanizing?
Oh yeah, I definitely think it was. I think the movie was so wrapped up in this complex narrative that wasn't as complex as it really played it up to be. And then the film became very procedural, especially with the male characters. I mean, none of the male characters were all that interesting, except I kind of like the uncle because there was this cold clinical thing that, while it doesn't work as a character, it is interesting to try to conceive what his whole deal was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this film is not particularly sympathetic to men, and it annoyed me that once the guy who plays the part of Count Fujiwara, once he started explaining his backstory, what his goals are, I was kind of interested because I was like, okay, cool, now we get it. This ties into this theme of searching for freedom, cool. And then the movie just ignored that and then treated him like shit for the rest of the movie. He was a shitty person for the rest of the movie, and that was all we got. We got this one little moment where he was a normal dude, and that was about it.
Right. So the movie takes place in 1930s Korea during Japanese occupation, which unfortunately that's not a huge centerpiece of the film, or
in a traditional sense. I disagree with you. That is the pivot of the entire film, but not in the traditional sense of we're gonna have a war scene. They set it up with the very first shot. You see the soldiers there, so automatically you're like, this is wartime, this is occupation, this is when and where we are. So you're kind of looking for that for the rest of the movie, but it plays more into who the characters are than what happens as a plot point.
So you're saying that in a sense it's more in the realm of the senses, where it's about these two people interconnecting during wartime.
No, but there's so much of the characters having self-loathing that's very descriptive of Korea during the Japanese occupation. And they talk about that extensively in the movie, where the Korean characters think that Japan is so beautiful and they want to be a part of the Japanese culture and they want to be naturalized as Japanese citizens because they hate their Korean heritage. That is entirely about the war and the occupation, just not in a traditional sense where they're on the front lines or they're a part of the battlefield. This is more of what's going on with a civilian impact.
So do you think that the uncle is supposed to represent the Japanese occupation as this oppressive force? Do you think he's representative of that in a sense?
I do, because they chose like one of the more dislikable things about Japanese culture to present him with, in terms of like the very, fetishizing erotica that even to this day we all fucking make fun of. One of the centerpieces of the film is that one really iconic drawing of the woman being eaten out by a giant fucking octopus,
which created tentacle porn.
Yeah, exactly. That's a centerpiece in the film. So I think that they took like this one very dislikable aspect of Japanese culture and had this guy who wants to be a naturalized Japanese citizen and just had him embody that entire philosophy. From a Western perspective, it looked like there was definitely this, women say fuck the patriarchy kind of a vibe to it as well.
I didn't really feel that
really
a lot in the film. I felt
library scene, and not to mention all of the reading scenes.
I saw it as more of kind of this criticism of Japanese sexuality as being clinical, to the point where like there's no touch to it, and that's where the lesbian romance comes in. Like theirs is very much, going to the scene where like she's enacting fucking a puppet, comparing that to the scene where Suki is eating her out. Mm-hmm. That's so sensual. I thought the shot that they used when she was eating her out was kind of ridiculous.
Why?
It was kind of goofy.
The close up?
The close up where like her tongue's like sticking out and like she's about to go down. I thought that was kind of goofy. Like I totally get it. This is gonna make me sound really perverted, but I prefer the. No, not gonna.
You started it.
All right. I prefer like the looking up and looking down. I prefer in scenes where like somebody's getting eaten out or something like that, for like the eyes to be looking up between the legs instead of like, like the camera right there. Like it seems removed, like that, like the way that was shot, it seemed removed from the sexuality. It was almost like, the censors came in and were like, you can't do this, so like we're gonna do this instead. I don't know.
No fucking way. First of all, no, because when you see that scene again later and you see all of the everything of that scene, it's not a thing of like, oh, we had to censor it because we can't possibly see like the top part of like whatever fucking pubic hair, whatever it could have been. It was very much him trying so hard to put himself in the perspective of the women.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I thought the bath scene worked better.
Well, like the film, just
when the film was sensual, it worked better than when it was sexual. I thought.
I don't agree with that at all. But Park Chan-wook is always playing with voyeurism, but there was a distinct lack of voyeurism in that scene, and I think if you did the looking up and looking down thing like you're talking about, it would have played back into that very far removed feeling that a lot of the other shots have, where everyone is spying on each other. So when you put it in that very personal shot, that is them removing this entire layer of looking at each other from across the way, through peoples, whatever. That was making a more direct contact in a more personal way.
Yeah. So in the film, Suki is a thief and somebody who's grown up in poverty. And this is sort of, she's sent on this sort of mission to impersonate a handmaiden, and then, steal various things from the household. But the whole thing is like a giant con job with her and the Count. Mm-hmm. However, that's later flipped on its head when it turns out that the Count is in it for himself, or is he?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, he flipped at one point because originally he didn't flip. It's just his true colors came out. Like he was double crossing both of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so especially like the scene where he's on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
See, I thought they were just gonna like cut him in half right there. When you saw the samurai.
Yeah.
I think that might have worked better. Like,
but then we would have gotten this impression that the women had sent for the guys to do that themselves.
Yeah.
That would have been kind of misleading.
So this is an interesting film about the difference between lust, sex as an act, and love.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the film, it seems that nobody understands all of those together.
Yeah.
It seems like everybody's like on one side of the coin. Like Suki is in love. Like she wants love.
Mm-hmm.
Her sex is love. Whereas Hideko is more lustful. Like it feels, at least at the very beginning, that like her interactions with Suki are much more lustful, and then it turns into a blooming romance after that. But it seems that
she's really playing around with lust because she doesn't really understand lust in a healthy way.
Well, yeah, they said that she said at one point that she was a child, like she was still infantilized and didn't like understand the whole concept because she
was lying in that scene when she said that she was flat out fucking lying.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was a lie or whether that was like one of those things that like it's like partial truth.
Yeah. Not really. Okay. That was just a lie. Where she's like, I don't even know what we would do.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
I don't even know what we would do on our wedding night. I guess we would kiss? I don't know.
Yeah.
After all those scenes where she's like reading all this raunchy, dirty erotica to all these old men who are just watching her, do weird reenactments with wooden puppets.
I thought it was kind of interesting that the movie itself created a parallel between those stories and the Marquis de Sade.
Yeah. Gloria was like, was that Sade? It sounded like Sade. And it's like, it didn't sound quite like Sade, but okay.
There's an element of sadism to it.
Oh, there was an element of sadism to it, but an element.
I did think it was kind of interesting that all the guys were like imagining themselves being whipped by her, mm-hmm. or were they being whipped by her? Because
it was imagination.
Okay, because that was one of the things I was a little confused of just when I was seeing that scene, whether or not like it was actually happening or whether that was just their sexual
fantasy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was fantasy.
Which is kind of interesting because, like, so often the common idea of S&M is it's usually all to the women, but like if you really get into like people with power, especially men with power, 50 Shades of Grey would be Anastasia whipping Christian Grey, like if it were accurate to like how the whole like BDSM culture works,
right?
Everything.
Yeah, like the powerful man doesn't want a woman. Well, not always, obviously. Everyone's different.
I mean, you do have your Roger Ailes.
Yeah, but in general, the powerful man doesn't want
the Roger Ailes thing.
What is the Roger Ailes thing?
He was like the head of Fox News, and he was like doing like weird like power plays with girls. It was like really fucked up. Friend of Donald Trump and all that kind of stuff. It's fucked up. As you were saying, sorry. So narratively, I felt that the film was a bit disjointed.
That's because you looked at it as a chronological story, as in going from plot point to plot point, as opposed to looking at it as character development. Because when you look at it as character development, it goes from here's the straightforward narrative, and we're getting into the twist of the characters, and this is where we're delving a little bit deeper into them, and now we're establishing that they're not who you thought they were. End of part one, going into part two. They play with that a little bit more, and the characters twist around again. That's the end of part 2. And then at part 3, the aspects of their personalities that you've seen separate come together into one cohesive person for each of the characters. So when you put it into that sort of way, the narrative has like a very smooth flow, but just not in a plot point to plot point to plot point kind of way.
So overall, I thought the romance of the film, because this film is a romantic thriller, when all is said and done, pretty much, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting. I didn't feel the characters were strong enough for me to have a strong emotional bond for it. I felt it scraping at it a little bit, but I felt everybody in the film was a little too cold, and I was disappointed because as a Chanwook Park fan, that's not what I expect to see out of his films.
Which is weird because, like, in his films, his characters are always really selfish.
But there's always a layer of dimensions with his characters. Like, even bad characters. There's never... You don't watch a Chanwook Park film and just go like, oh, I really feel for this character. And then, you see a character on the opposite end and you're just yeah, fuck him. Because the movie will fuck with you, especially in Oldboy. Yeah. When the villain, is more sympathetic in several aspects than even Odaisu. Like, you look at Odaisu and you're like, you're a fucking dick. And then, you see that scene and then you're like, well, you're a fucking dick too. You're watching... I don't want to spoil Oldboy. But I will say that, that film does a much better job of creating, these layers. Just these layers. Especially, look at Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, where... you're watching the final battle scene between two characters that you like that don't understand what's going on. And it's heartbreaking. This film didn't have that. This film didn't give one character, one scene to redeem them really in any way. There were opportunities to. And the scene where Count Fujiwara was being tortured would have worked so much better if I cared for his character.
Or the other guy.
Yeah.
The villain was phenomenally boring and undeveloped. Ooh, I'm pervy and don't give a shit about women. Okay? Good for you. Well, what the fuck am I supposed to feel about that?
Well, it would have been nice to have more information because, when you see his, basement of curiosities where it's, penises, vulvas, all this fucking shit, it's interesting. I would have liked to know more about that scene, but the movie
literally his entire personality is he's pervy and he likes beating people up.
That's boring.
It is boring.
That's not
what I said.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm disappointed with that being a Chanwook Park.
Yeah, I am too. I agree.
Because he doesn't do that. I expect this out of lower directors. When I go to Korean films, I expect something that's a little bit broader, something that messes with my sense of morality. A great example is a film called I Saw the Devil, where at the end of the film, you literally don't know which character is worse. So, I mean, that was what I took from that film. So...
I mean, I thought both of the women were really well developed, and then that's as far as it went. And, even a lot of the other women were well developed. If you look at Sasaki, and you see, oh, she doesn't really like the women in the movie, whatever. Oh, it's because she was originally the pervy guy's first wife, and then he disowned her, but they still sleep together, but they don't really know each other at all either. You never see them interact. Like that. That didn't really make her interesting because that didn't do anything. Okay, you threw that in there. Do I care? Does it come up? Is that no? That doesn't affect the way that anyone acts around each other. It doesn't change the way that you see the movie before then. It's just shrug. Okay.
I will say that I would have preferred if all three characters wound up in the basement at the end of the film, and that it was a struggle to get out.
It was weird.
However, the Mercury aspect would have made that impossible. You would have had to had
killed everyone. Yeah,
either kill everybody or have a different setup.
it was weird seeing Park Chan-wook film where it was so happy at the end.
Yeah,
it was like the only two good guys got away with everything and lived happily ever after, and that's it. Their new life is going to be so great, going to some nondescript location. They're going to Shanghai, right? Yeah, they changed it from Russia to Shanghai. I'm like, okay, so you're going from not Japan and not Korea to Shanghai. That's so far away. That's entirely playing.
Do you have any idea of the views of homosexuality during that time? Would it have been looked very down upon?
Well, it didn't really play into the film where earlier Suki was talking about how her dream is to go far away and eat food she doesn't recognize, and forget all about Hideko, but Shanghai's not that far.
No, it's
that's not that culturally very different. I thought you meant going out west, but no, not really.
Yeah, it also would have been nice to have if you're going to make them have a happy ending, to at least hint that possibly where they are might not be that great for them.
Well, that's the whole allure of their idea of traveling. You just keep moving around, so then you don't have to adhere to social norms because you're always going to be the outsider.
I think the only glimpse that we had of that was when she put the mustache in the gloves and threw it overboard. That's one of those things where it's yeah, you carried on this facade without getting to your destination first. That might not have been a good idea. So that's one where it's okay, I can kind of grasp how that might be a scary situation, and these women might get in trouble with the law and then be put into prostitution, all that kind of stuff. So there is that aspect that you thinking about what they're doing could lead you to come up with that kind of conclusion, which does make the film a little bit darker, but the film doesn't hint in one way or another for that.
Yeah, it's not really like Snowpiercer where it's more apparent that it's both a good and a bad thing, because at the end, spoiler, when you see the bear, you're like, oh hey, cool, there's life, and then it's oh shit, they're gonna die. Okay.
I also think he's
at least one of them's gonna die.
I also think he's a better filmmaker than Park Chan-wook, and that's saying something.
Bong Joon-ho?
Bong Joon-ho, yeah. Yes, I believe he is a much better filmmaker than Chan-wook Park. Okay.
I didn't really compare them because they were Korean. That was just the first thing I thought of, where it was one of those bittersweet endings where you don't really know if it's happy or sad.
One of the things that I actually appreciate about the film is the fact that it did feel like Chanwook Park was getting outside of his comfort zone and doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that the film that he makes next will do it better. I don't know if he's going to stick with this kind of time period, whether he's going to make a trilogy out of this sort of...
Yes, please. Yes, please. Do that one. Handmaiden trilogy.
Well,
I would watch the shit out of that.
I think it would be interesting if he did something about love, he had his love trilogy, or
yeah, that would be really cool. That would be really cool. I'd watch the shit out of that.
Yeah, so that's what I'd propose for him to, because I know I was really negative about the film, but I did like it. It's just there were certain aspects that I was disappointed as a Chanwook Park film. As just a regular film, this film was great. As a Chanwook Park film, disappointed.
Okay. Well then.
So what did you take from the film?
I mean, I hate romance stories in general because they're so overused that usually it's more about the story and less about the characters. And if you don't give a shit about the characters and you don't give a shit about the characters together, what's the fucking point? Who cares what happens? And for me personally, the idea of a story where it's oh, these two women fall in love with each other, but one of them's engaged to another man, what will they do? Is fucking boring. That story sounds boring to me. But it worked really well in this film because he developed their characters so well, and in a very not stereotypical cardboard cutout way. each of them had a duplicity to their personality. And it was interesting seeing their relationship with each other, both when they were being fake to each other and when they were being real. And it's kind of like Catwoman and Batman, where you like them because of the way they interact as Catwoman and Batman and as Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne. And when you see that interaction between each other and you see the ways that they pull and push, that's what makes it really compelling. And that worked very well in this film, where at first it's kind of this sort of, oh, well, she's the more down and dirty, tomboy kind of girl who just sees like this meek, sick woman who wants to take care of her. And then by the end of it, it's like, oh, no, she is way fucking stronger than you. You are weak in comparison. But seeing the way that they are so different and it balancing out throughout a lot of the film was what made it a lot more interesting.
Also, like, as you say that, I was thinking about tropes in romance movies, and one of the most common tropes that I see in romances centered around women is the caretaker narrative, where it's like she's taking care of like some sickly old guy or something like that, and then there's like blooming romance with that. Like it.
Well, there's also the maternal trope. Like you kind of see that in what was it? The Duke of Burgundy. Sorry, you didn't see that. I saw that. It was kind of like that, where it was like the mom and the child who also fuck.
Well, comparing this to another lesbian film that I did see, I would compare it to Blue is the Warmest Color, which is a film about lust, and like not really fitting in. So like what I've told people a lot about Blue is the Warmest Color is it is a 10 out of 10 movie before you have the ridiculous sex scene that goes on way too long. And then that bumps it to an 8-star movie for me.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't see Blue is the Warmest Color, so I don't know. I don't really have a desire to see that movie, honestly.
It's really good. It just has a sex scene that kind of ruins the movie.
Honestly, I'm more upset about them changing the name of the main character. Like, that's literally the only reason why I'm like, I'm not even interested, man.
Oh, because they changed it to the actress's name?
Yeah, like, first of all, I'm dubious of what kind of a performance she can give if she can't even answer to a character name. But B, that just feels like Clementine's character is kind of tied into her name, at least for me when I was reading the comic. So the idea of taking that away and calling it Adele, I don't know.
What's
that
even
whole
more
concept
fucked
just
up
makes it really unappealing to me.
What's even more fucked up is the French title of the movie is actually The Life of Adele.
So, like, what's the connection to the comic at that point?
Right.
Yeah, that's dumb.
What's the connection to the comic? The fact that she dates a person with blue hair.
Yeah, that's about it. So, no thanks. I'm gonna pass on that one, I think.
It's good.
Well, I'm sure it is. So, how are you comparing Blue is the Warmest Color to The Handmaiden?
I think it was a film that conveyed the confusion between lust and love.
Yeah, because that was definitely part of this movie was, and I feel like you have this in a relationship no matter whether you're gay, straight, whatever, whoever the fuck you're with, where it's like at first you don't really know, do they like you, do they not like you, do I like them, do I not like them, is it lust, is it love, what the fuck, how do we feel? And the movie played around with those emotions a lot more, which is why that worked more narratively the way that it was chronologically rather than plot point wise.
The only problem that I have with the narrative structure that it was in the film was the fact that Suki is gone for too long in the second part.
I definitely agree with that, because by the
that
time she comes back,
yeah, that took away from my connection to her character, so that when you have like this whole thing about like we're running out and all that kind of stuff, it's like narratively I'm not as emotionally invested because you got down to the plot and all that kind of stuff, and it actually hindered their salvation from this experience.
Well,
that
it made
you
it
don't
more
really
about
see,
Hideko than about Suki.
Yeah, but also you don't really see much of her in the mental institution. Like, this is supposed to be like...
That's because she wasn't there very long. She was there for like a few hours.
It would have been nice for her to be set up there while you're playing the narrative, just so that like you can keep that in the back of your mind, like, oh, she put her here.
But she didn't, because they set this up with, like, okay, so you know how
I get that they were setting that up, and
but you know, like how there was the old woman that she lived with, and they had all the babies, and it was like that group where they were all conning and stealing or whatever. Well, they had both together written back to that woman and said, hey, so we're going to do something else away from this other count guy. We're going to set me up in a mental institute, and I need you guys to start a fire and come in and break me out. So with the plot being that way, there was never a moment of betrayal. You know, we kind of get tricked into that, but really chronologically, when you look at their relationship, there's never a point where one of them betrays the other. That just doesn't happen in the movie.
Which is why the conversation, you know, never lie to me, all that stuff, still
you'll
plays.
Never betray me, I'll never ever betray you. It's all true. You know, there was never a point of betrayal. It was all play active. Which is probably why you feel like this movie's really cold. Is so much of the plot is based off of people acting and pretending, like, so much that it gets confusing.
Yeah, and even emotions are lied about in the film.
Yeah, to a certain extent, I guess.
I think probably the biggest twist in the film was actually Count Fujiwara trying to rape Lady Hideko. Mm-hmm. What do you think? No?
That was my big disappointment moment with the movie. Like, I know you had it with the uncle guy, but I kind of had it with him because right before that, we're getting into his personality a little bit. We're like, you know, Hideko is looking for freedom from this life of being like this fucking sex doll. You know, she wants the freedom to go out and do whatever she wants to do. Suki is looking for freedom to be with the woman that she loves. And then you get into this other guy who has been like kind of a dick the whole movie. And he's just looking for the freedom to order a glass of wine without looking at the price, which I think that sounds like so tame in comparison, but I think that's something we can all relate to.
Right.
Like, we don't even want to be, like, massively rich. We just want to, like, get through life easily.
I personally would have liked it if the movie played more on those three characters' interactions.
Yeah.
In a less cold way. Or at least given us a little bit more backstory with Count Fujiwara.
We have his entire backstory. We just don't care about it.
Like I said, you know, just because you're delivered something through exposition doesn't mean we give a fuck about the character.
That's what I just said.
Well, I'm saying that's part of the problem. We're given this information through exposition, not through action, not through, like, you know, moments and all that kind of stuff, which makes it harder to empathize. And the movie doesn't really even give us an opportunity to empathize with the character. So when he's being tortured, we don't give a shit. We're more just kind of like repulsed by the torture than we are by the fact that the character is being tortured.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, my disappointment was that as soon as we get an understanding of the character at all, oh, now he has to turn around and be a rapist. That's great. Okay, never mind.
I will say that...
Like, what the fuck are we supposed to think after that? Like, I give a shit about your fucking paycheck when, like, oh, don't worry, it actually feels better if I use force. What the fuck, dude?
That kind of reminds me of the scene in Oldboy where she's like, it hurts, but I'll endure it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but that was so different. Because, like, in this one, it was so superficial. I mean, like, the movie proved earlier that you can use sex and sexuality in a non-exploitative way if you get into the characters and then immediately turn around and use it in an exploitative way. I mean, there's a lot of that sort of hypocrisy in the film anyway. Like, oh, you know, fuck your erotica, fuck your treatment of women. You know, we are not things seen in the library, but... You know, she's also like, oh, I want to try this scissoring thing that I read about in a book. I want to try this thing with the bells that I read about in this fucking erotica that I so, you know, liberatingly destroyed. You know, there is that two-way hypocrisy when it comes to the treatment of sexuality, and I don't think that was a mistake on his part. I guarantee that was all very intentional, trying to point out this way that we discuss it, you know. But at the same time, it's also just like, okay.
So, there are other movies that talk about sexuality that, if you like this movie, that I would recommend. Films such as Blue is the Warmest Color, which I mentioned before.
I would not recommend The Duke of Burgundy, just by the way.
Nymphomaniac is a film that I would also recommend.
Yes.
Shame
Yes.
is a film that I would recommend. I do think it's interesting that we're getting to the point where we're starting to explore the psychological of the sexual in films.
Mm-hmm.
Usually sex, you know, when you watch older films, usually sex is almost like an afterthought.
Yeah.
And not really pertinent to the plot. I mean, you do have films like Straw Dogs or, of course, The Graduate.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, a lot of times sex is an act and there are consequences for that act. But, you know, when it comes to, like, sexuality itself, it's not really explored, you know, until now.
Right, exactly.
You know, in the past, like, 5 years.
Yeah, because out of everything, like, that I could see in films, the thing that makes me the most uncomfortable is usually sex. And it's not because, like, I find anything wrong with sex, but it's because it's usually purely for the sake of titillating the audience instead of having anything to do with character storytelling. And that's where I get bored, and where I'm like, you know what, don't fucking do that to me. No, I'm not going to be a part of this fucking equation. Not interested.
Yeah, if you like Nymphomaniac, and Nymphomaniac has explicit sex.
But that's about the character and her sexuality. That's a huge part of her identity. So in that case, that's not being played up for my sexual enjoyment. You know, if I want to go to somewhere to get sexual enjoyment, I will find porn that I like, you know. I don't go to the movies to, like, oh, don't you think it's so hot when he touches her boobs, or whatever the fuck it might be. It's like, no, can we, like, ew.
Yeah, and I will say that, like, if you're going to the movie to get that, you'll probably be disappointed.
Yeah, there's not a lot of that.
I actually was more impressed by the sensuality of the film than I was the sexuality of the film. Like, the bathtub scene was more sexual than the actual sex scene, in my opinion.
I disagree with that, but okay.
I thought it played in more to her character. You know, the other part did too, but there was just something so innocent about that scene where she, like, glances down at her breasts,
mm-hmm.
and, like, how she's, like, putting
her finger in the mouth.
In the mouth and everything like that. And if this were a movie that were made in, like, the 60s, that would be a lesbian movie in and of itself.
I thought
just
the
that
dressing scene was probably more so.
I thought the dressing scene was good.
I thought the dressing scene was excellent.
All right, so if you have seen The Handmaiden, let us know what you think. If you haven't seen The Handmaiden, I'm sorry that we spoiled the movie for you, and shame on you. All right, if there is another review that you would like us to tackle, let us know in the comments below. If you feel that we should present this in a different format, let us know. Thanks for listening.